It was late, probably too late to be out, especially after a few drinks at my buddy's place. The kind of late where the streets feel dead and every shadow seems like it's watching you. But there I was, standing on the corner, waiting for my ride. I could have stayed the night, but I had an early shift in the morning and the idea of sleeping on a beer-stained couch didn't sit right with me. I opened the app and saw the car approaching. A black sedan, 4 stars, driver named Rick. Nothing screamed danger about it. The car pulled up and I slid into the passenger seat. The driver, Rick, looked normal, middle-aged, clean-shaven, wearing a baseball cap. He gave me a polite nod as I buckled in. "Late night, huh?" he said, his voice casual but with a hint of exhaustion. "Yeah, just trying to get home," I replied, leaning back and closing my eyes. The car smelled faintly of pine air freshener, mixed with something off. It wasn't bad, just weird. Maybe leftover fast food. As we pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced back at the road through the window, but for some reason, I felt this nagging sensation to turn around. You ever get that? Like someone staring at you? So I turned. There was someone sitting in the back seat. I froze. It wasn't like he'd jumped out and screamed boo or anything. He was just there. Quiet. His face was partially hidden under a hoodie, but his eyes, those were locked on me. They didn't blink, didn't move, just boring into the back of my skull. "Oh, didn't realize this was a shared ride," I said, trying to sound casual, even though my pulse was picking up. Rick didn't respond right away. His hands gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles going white. "Yeah, sometimes the app doubles up rides," he mumbled, not looking at me. The guy in the back didn't say a word, didn't even nod, just sat there, staring. Something about him didn't feel right. His hoodie looked damp like he'd been out in the rain, but it hadn't rained all night. I tried to let it go, turning back to face the road, but my chest felt tight. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably a text, but when I reached for it, I realized something. The guy in the back hadn't moved. Not a single twitch, it was like he was frozen. And that's when I noticed. He wasn't breathing. My palms were sweating as I stared ahead, pretending like everything was fine. But it wasn't. Nothing about this ride felt okay anymore. The car was too quiet, like the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. "Hey man, where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The route on my app didn't match the streets we were on. "Just a quick detour," Rick said, his voice calm but distant. "Some construction up ahead." Construction? At this time of night? I wasn't buying it. I pulled out my phone to check the map, but no service. Just that spinning wheel that mocks you when you need it most. "Look, I can walk from here if it's easier," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "No need," Rick replied, his grip on the wheel looking even tighter now. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, not at me, but at the guy in the back, the guy who still hadn't moved. I turned around again, against every instinct screaming at me to just sit still. His face, what little I could see, was pale, almost gray. And his eyes, they weren't just staring anymore, they were glaring. That's when he moved. Just a little. Enough to lean forward, his hoodie slipping back to reveal more of his face. His lips parted like he was going to say something, but no sound came out. And those eyes, they were wrong. Too glossy, like he wasn't fully alive. I snapped back to face Rick. "What the hell is going on, man? Who is this guy?" Rick's jaw tightened. "I told you. Sometimes the app doubles up rides." I reached for the door handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. Panic surged through me. "Unlock the door, Rick," I said, my voice firmer now. My hand was gripping the handle so hard it hurt. He didn't respond. The car kept moving, the headlights cutting through the empty road. And then, the guy in the back spoke. "You shouldn't have gotten in." His voice was low, almost a growl, but there was something off about it, like it echoed, even though we were in a small car. My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" I whispered, turning to face him again. But he was gone. The seat was empty. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced as I stared at the empty seat. He was there. I know he was there. I wasn't imagining it. But now, nothing. Just a dark, damp imprint on the leather where he'd been sitting. "What the hell, Rick?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Where did he go? What's going on?" Rick didn't answer. His eyes stayed glued to the road, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the sweat on his temples. He knew something. He was hiding something. I grabbed his arm, jerking the wheel slightly. "Answer me." The car swerved and he finally snapped. "Shut up. You don't understand." "Don't understand what?" I shouted back, my voice rising over the sound of tires screeching as he fought to straighten the car. Rick took a deep breath, his hands trembling on the wheel. "I didn't want this. They make me do it. If I don't, they come for me." "Who's they?" I demanded, my heart racing faster than ever. Before he could answer, the temperature in the car dropped, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath fogged up the window, and then, from the back seat I heard it, a low, guttural chuckle. He was back. I whipped around, and there he was, sitting in the same spot, but now his face was fully visible. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, God, those eyes were black, empty, bottomless. His lips curled into a smile that didn't belong on any living thing. "You can't run," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Not from us." The car jerked to a stop. Rick slammed on the brakes so hard that I lurched forward, the seatbelt digging into my chest. We were in the middle of nowhere, the road stretching endlessly in both directions, surrounded by nothing but darkness. "Get out!" Rick screamed, his voice shaking. "Get out of the car now!" I didn't need to be told twice. I fumbled with the lock, and this time, it clicked open. I threw the door wide and stumbled onto the asphalt, gasping for air like I'd been drowning. I turned back to the car, expecting Rick to follow, but he didn't move. He just sat there, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping him alive. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, wide with terror. "Rick, come on!" I shouted, but he shook his head. "I can't," he whispered. "It's too late for me." And then the car started to roll forward, slowly at first, then picking up speed. I watched in stunned silence as it disappeared down the road, its taillights fading into the darkness. And just as it vanished, I heard it. A scream. Rick's scream. It was cut short, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there, shaking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My phone was still in my pocket, but there was no signal, no way to call for help. The cold lingered, wrapping around me like a vice. Then I felt it. A presence behind me. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to just run, but my legs felt like they were stuck in quicksand. Slowly I turned my head, and there he was. The passenger, standing in the middle of the road, just a few feet away. His smile was wider now, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't even begin to understand. "You got out," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "But you'll never leave." I bolted. I don't know how I found the strength, but I ran. The road seemed endless, stretching into the abyss, but I didn't stop. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for mercy, but I kept going, fueled by pure terror. Eventually, I saw it. A faint light in the distance. A gas station. I burst through the doors, gasping for air, and the clerk looked up, startled. "You okay, man?" he asked, his voice breaking the suffocating silence. I need help," I stammered, my voice barely audible. "There's someone out there." But when I turned back to the road, it was empty. No car, no figure, just darkness. The clerk called the cops, and I waited, trying to piece together what had just happened. When they arrived, they searched the area but found nothing. No Rick, no car, no passenger. It was like none of it had ever happened. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And every now and then, when I'm driving alone at night, I catch a glimpse of him in my rearview mirror. Just for a second. Just enough to remind me that some rides you're never really meant to take. It was one of those nights where everything felt like it was going wrong. I was somewhere in the middle of Iowa, stuck on a lonely stretch of road with no gas stations or motels in sight. My phone was dead, my feet were blistered, and I could feel the cold creeping into my bones. Hitchhiking wasn't my first choice, but what else could I do? That's when I saw the headlights cutting through the darkness. The black SUV slowed down, its tires crunching against the gravel. For a moment, I hesitated. My gut whispered, "Don't do it." But the driver rolled down his window and gave me a friendly smile. "You need a ride?" he asked. He looked harmless, middle-aged, a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. His voice was casual, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. I told myself I was being paranoid. "Yeah," I said, climbing in. "Thanks, man. You're a lifesaver." The first few minutes were fine. He asked where I was headed, and I explained I was backpacking across the country. He nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. He told me his name was Bill, said he was heading in the same direction. Small talk. Nothing weird. Then I noticed the music. It was soft at first, almost soothing. Some kind of instrumental piece. But as the minutes passed, I started picking up on these strange sounds mixed into the melody. Whispers, faint sobs, the kind of noises that make your skin crawl. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was tired. "So, what kind of music is this?" I asked, forcing a laugh to mask my unease. "Just something I like," he said, his voice flat. His fingers tapped the steering wheel in rhythm with the haunting tune. He didn't look at me, didn't elaborate. The farther we drove, the darker it got. The road narrowed and the trees seemed to close in around us. The music grew louder, and now there was no mistaking it. Those weren't just whispers. They were screams, and they weren't coming from the radio. I was sure of it. The car suddenly jerked to the right, pulling onto a dirt road that disappeared into the woods. "Shortcut," Bill said, his tone casual, like we were taking a scenic route. My stomach dropped. "This doesn't look like a shortcut," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are we going?" He didn't answer. His hand reached for the volume knob, cranking the music louder. The screams filled the car, a horrifying symphony of agony and despair. I pressed myself against the door, my hand fumbling for the lock. It didn't budge. "Relax," he said, finally glancing at me. For the first time I saw it, something cold and predatory behind his smile. "We're almost there." "Almost where?" I glanced around the car, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. That's when I saw it, a stack of cassette tapes on the dashboard. Each one was labeled with a date and a name. My heart skipped a beat when I saw today's date scribbled on the tape currently in the player. "What's with the tapes?" I asked, my voice shaking. He chuckled, low and quiet. "Memories," he said. "I like to keep them close." My pulse was racing. The whispers, the screams, they weren't just recordings. They were real. I was listening to the last moments of people like me. And if I didn't get out of that car, I was next. I knew I had to act fast. The car slowed as the dirt road ended in a clearing. There was a small cabin up ahead, its windows glowing with a faint, eerie light. "End of the line," Bill said, grinning as he killed the engine. He reached into the glove compartment, and I didn't wait to see what he was grabbing. I threw myself against the door, slamming my shoulder into it until the lock gave way. The door flew open and I stumbled out, hitting the ground hard. "Get back here," he roared, but I was already running. The forest was a blur of shadows and moonlight. Branches whipped against my face, my lungs burning as I pushed myself harder. Behind me, I could hear him crashing through the trees, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. Then I saw it, a second light flickering through the trees. Another cabin? No. It was a fire. A large bonfire surrounded by dark shapes. People. Or something that looked like people. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The figures were chanting, their voices low and guttural. And then I saw what they were circling. A pile of cassette tapes just like the ones in Bill's car. Before I could process what I was seeing, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, swinging wildly, and managed to knock Bill off balance. He fell to the ground, but his laugh sent chills down my spine. "You think you're safe now?" he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into." I didn't wait to find out. I ran toward the fire, toward the figures. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I hoped they'd help me. But as I got closer, their faces came into focus. Pale, hollow-eyed, and smiling. They weren't human. The last thing I remember was their hands reaching for me, their chants drowning out Bill's laughter. And then, silence. It all started on one of those nights where everything feels off. You know the kind. The air feels heavier, and even the silence feels louder. I had stayed late at the university, trying to finish an overdue project. By the time I wrapped up, it was past midnight, and the campus was eerily quiet. My usual bus had stopped running hours ago, so I did what any broke college student would do. I ordered a cheap rideshare. The app showed my driver was Mitch in an old beat-up sedan. 5 stars, a couple of reviews. Good enough. When the car pulled up, the first thing I noticed was the rattling sound it made as it idled. Mitch rolled down the window and flashed me a grin that showed a little too much gum and not enough teeth. "You Ethan?" he asked, his voice raspy but upbeat. I nodded, throwing my backpack into the back seat before sliding in. The car smelled weird, like stale coffee mixed with something metallic. But I was tired, and it wasn't like I had other options. At first it was normal. Mitch tried making small talk, where I studied, how late I was out, but I was too drained to keep up. So, the ride settled into silence, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional ping of a notification from his phone. Then, about 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed we weren't following the route on the app. "Hey, this isn't the way to Riverside Drive," I said, trying to sound casual, even though my chest tightened. "Ah, yeah," Mitch replied, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "There's some construction up ahead. This is a shortcut, saves us like 5 minutes." "A shortcut? Sure. But why didn't the app show it?" My thumb hovered over my phone screen. No signal. Great. I glanced out the window. The streetlights were getting fewer and farther between. The buildings thinned out into empty lots, then into trees. My stomach sank. Something wasn't right. I tried to play it cool. "So, been driving long tonight?" "Yeah, picked up a couple folks before you. Quiet night, though." I nodded, forcing a smile, but my mind was racing. The route, the smell, his weird energy. It all felt wrong. And then I noticed the stains. On the passenger seat near the headrest was a dark, crusty smear. Blood? I wasn't sure, but it made my pulse spike. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. Something, or someone, moved in the trunk. It was subtle, just a shift in the shadows, but I saw it. My breath hitched, and I looked away quickly, pretending I hadn't noticed. My heart pounded so loud I was sure Mitch could hear it. What the hell was in that trunk? I couldn't stop looking at the mirror. Every time my eyes darted up, I swore I saw movement. It wasn't like someone banging on the trunk or anything. It was smaller, subtler. A shifting shadow, almost like whoever, or whatever, was in there was trying not to be noticed. I had to act normal. Mitch glanced at me occasionally, humming to himself like we were on a joyride. But I wasn't stupid. I could feel my pulse thundering in my neck, and my hands were sweating so much I had to wipe them on my jeans. "You okay back there?" Mitch asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence like a whip. "Yeah, just tired," I muttered, forcing a yawn. Long day, you know? He nodded but didn't say anything else. My phone was still useless. No signal, no way to call for help. I thought about texting someone anyway, just in case it went through later, but I didn't want to tip Mitch off. I needed time. I needed a plan. Then he took another turn, this one sharper and slower than before. We weren't even on a road anymore, just a dirt path surrounded by trees on either side. Panic bubbled up in my chest, but I shoved it down. This doesn't look like a shortcut," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Relax, kid," Mitch replied, not even glancing back. "It's just a back road, quicker this way." Quicker to where? My stomach twisted as I noticed the faint glint of a knife handle poking out of the cup holder. I swallowed hard and clenched my fists, trying not to think about the worst-case scenarios. And then I saw it again. The trunk shifted slightly, and this time it wasn't just a shadow. A pair of fingers, thin, pale, briefly curled over the edge of the back seat. My heart nearly stopped. Someone was back there, alive. I had to do something, but what? If I confronted Mitch, I'd be screwed. If I tried to jump out of the car, I didn't know where the hell I was, and I wasn't even sure I'd survive the jump at this speed. I had to think, fast. My eyes scanned the car. The only thing within reach was a small, foldable umbrella sticking out of the side pocket of the door. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Mitch, can we stop for a sec?" I asked, trying to sound casual. I need to pee." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You can hold it, we're almost there." "Almost where?" I snapped before I could stop myself. His grin vanished. For the first time, his voice turned cold. "Don't worry about it." My heart sank. "Don't worry about it," is what people say before things go bad. Really bad. My grip tightened around the umbrella as I calculated my next move. Mitch slowed the car to a crawl as the dirt path opened up into a small clearing. There was nothing but trees, shadows, and an old run-down shed at the edge of the lot. He threw the car into park and turned to look at me, his grin back, but now stretched too wide, too forced. "Wait here," he said, grabbing something from under his seat, a roll of duct tape. My stomach flipped. As soon as he stepped out, I lunged for the door handle. Locked. Of course. My fingers fumbled for the unlock button, but then I heard it. A faint whimper from the trunk. My gut twisted. I couldn't leave without helping whoever was back there. Mitch was already circling around the back of the car. I only had seconds. Thinking fast, I leaned over and popped the trunk latch. It creaked open slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a girl, teenage, maybe 15, her wrists tied, eyes wide with terror. Mitch froze, realizing what I'd done. "You little," he started, but I didn't let him finish. I slammed the umbrella into his side with everything I had. He grunted, stumbling back, and I scrambled out of the car, pulling the girl out of the trunk with me. Her legs were weak, but she managed to stand, clutching my arm like her life depended on it, which it probably did. "Run!" I yelled, dragging her toward the woods. Mitch recovered quickly, and I heard his heavy footsteps pounding behind us. My lungs burned as we sprinted through the trees, the girl sobbing quietly but keeping pace. The darkness was disorienting, and I tripped more than once, but adrenaline kept me moving. A glimmer of hope appeared in the distance. Headlights. A car was coming down a nearby road. With one final burst of energy, I pushed the girl forward. "Wave them down!" I shouted. She stumbled onto the road, waving her tied hands frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and a middle-aged couple jumped out, their faces filled with shock. Mitch was closing in, but the man stepped in front of us, holding up a tire iron he'd pulled from his trunk. "Back off," he shouted. Mitch hesitated, realizing he was outnumbered. After a tense moment, he backed away, disappearing into the woods. The couple called the police, and within minutes, flashing lights filled the clearing. The girl was safe. Mitch was eventually caught. But that night, it's burned into my brain forever. I'll never get into a car with a stranger again.